Hello A2, welcome to what I think is your first video of the year, so I'm sure you're all very excited about that. I hope you've just enjoyed completing your first assessment and hopefully you feel quite confident. In class you've all been pretty good with the features of science, reliability and validity and so on, so I'm expecting good things, no pressure. First things first, I'm just going to check that you've done everything that you need to do, otherwise you need to backtrack a little bit. The first thing I would like you to do is fill in the front sheet of your assessment booklet. So that's the very, very front thing with the lovely picture. I'm sure none of you looked like that this morning because you all knew there was going to be an assessment, so you were 100% confident. Target grades, this is the minimum you would be happy with or need, so you can use your AS grade as a guide. So this is the one where you're like, yeah, that'll do, that's me being fairly realistic, I can just about do that, not too bad. Aspirational grade, what you would love to get, so if you really pushed yourself, and generally would find that your aspirational grade is one grade above your target grade. And then on the second sheet, what you should have done is put your target from your exam analysis. So was that to contextualise more? Was that to write better evaluation points? Please reflect on how you do that. It's literally completely and utterly pointless you setting yourself those targets if you don't think how to do them. How do you write better evaluation? Think back to all the stuff I always talk about in class, such as contextualizing. How do you do that? You quote from the stimulus, write better evaluation points. How do you do that? You use P and you refer to terminology like validity and so on and so on. So please think carefully about how you say you're going to improve it. Answer the questions. At the moment I'm going to give you 35 minutes to complete them, but I might not have given you quite that long. You might find this slide was slightly different when Andy put it on the board for you, or when I put it on the board for you if it was me, depending on how long I rabbit on this video. So let's see. And finally, using this mark scheme, mark your answers, and then fill in all the assessment sheet. So you have the assessment objectives. I'd like you to tick or cross because there's only a little bit of space, and then at the bottom I would like you to tell me a general all-over idea. Did you meet your target? Did you drop? Did you fall down somewhere else? What is your new target? I'm going to give you that assessment again. What would you do to get full marks on it this time, or more marks on it? Please make it measurable. If it's just revise a bit harder, is that helpful? You should be doing that anyway. Is it about some kind of exam technique that you need to be using? Okay? If you haven't already answered the questions, if you can pause now and answer the questions for me, otherwise off we go. Question 1A. Sampling has already been done, so you won't get any marks for this. So hopefully you've all remembered that really clear structure of content analysis. The reason I go on and on and on about this is because this is a perfect example of a question where students just got on the exam and went, what? And that's not something that I want to happen to you. Please do not forget that content analysis exists, or how to conduct it. So normally, first of all, you talk about your sampling. That's already been done. They've got the diary. The next you talk about is a pilot, so you can give yourselves a mark if you mention that, and explain what it is. So select a small selection from the main sample and create a checklist or categories. And then you need some examples of behaviours. So aggression, crying. Please make sure that they are operationalised and measurable. Being angry is too vague. Really, I'd argue this is directly after marks. I personally would advise that aggression is too vague as well. Crying, hitting, punching, laughing, kicking, whatever it might be, all the different behaviours. And then the next thing I hopefully have mentioned is they read through all the diaries and tally your behaviours. So if you mention any of those, you get a mark, but just wait a minute because you'll see in a minute there's some key things you must mention, otherwise you don't get any of the marks. And compare, and then finally what they do is compare to before and after daycare. So technically if you get any 4 of those you should get 4 marks. If you get 3, you get 3 marks, and so on. However, for anything over 3 marks, if you're thinking, yeah, I've got 3 or 4 marks there, you must check that you've mentioned reading the diaries, reading the mother's writing, reading reports. Have you made some reference to reading that information? If you haven't, then you can't get over 3, you are limited at 2. So for example, maximum 2 marks if there's no reference to reading the diaries. The reason that is there is because you must contextualise. Can you read through your answer again? And remember, I'm taking these in and marking them as well. Can you underline or can you highlight where you've quoted from the stimulus? If it's literally the word mother, the word diaries, anything like that, children, daycare, that's is enough. So please can you highlight all the words where you have taken them from the stimulus. If you haven't got any already, I'm thinking your target is probably about contextualisation. 1B, 1 or more limitations. That means you can talk about 1, or you can talk about 2 or 3 or so on. I would encourage you to, and we'll come back to that in a second, have 2 P paragraphs, fairly concise, or 1 incredibly detailed P paragraph and 1 very brief P paragraph. It says of this investigation, which is another way of saying in this study, so no contextualisation, no marks. So can you pause the video here, look through, and can you highlight every single time that you have mentioned the stimulus in some way? If you're not able to highlight any words, then you do not get any marks. Okay. Mothers do not have enough time to write them, so these are 100 of different limitations. So I'm hoping that you are going to be capable enough as A2 students to go through and give yourselves the marks based on the structure of your evaluations. Have you done a point? Have you done an example? And have you done an explain? The point gets you a mark because you're showing your knowledge. The example gets you a mark because it's contextualization, and the explain gets you a mark because of the elaborate, which all fits in with the mark scheme. So it's a really valid reason as to why we are doing it. Another problem would be problems deciding on appropriate categories. So is there something that could fall across two categories? So somebody screaming with anger, so screaming with anger while punching something, that could fit into screaming, it could fit into aggression, and it could fit into punching. So is there any problems there? Does that impact the validity, etc., etc.? Think about the P structure. Demand characteristics, they could suffer from that. So if they realise they can work out the aim of the study, then they'll alter their behaviour. For example, the mothers might work out that they are expecting children's behaviour to change after daycare, so they would alter their answers. This therefore reduces the validity. Really good P paragraph. Attrition rate or dropout rate. Did the mothers drop out? And also, if you think carefully, the kind of mothers that might have dropped out, or children that might have dropped out, might have been the ones that didn't have any time to give to the study because their children had changed so drastically. So we are seeing a very unrepresentative sample there. The mothers who go, wow, I can't do the study anymore, I haven't got time to write all this information down because my child's become very challenging. Whereas the mothers whose children haven't become so challenging would probably have more time to engage with the study. So are we getting a very biased view because of the attrition or the dropout rate? Lack of control, so they don't talk anything about the time spent in daycare. They might spend 1 hour there, they might spend 6 days a week there, or the type of daycare as well. There are lots of different types. The sample is not representative. 9-month-old children is not a representative sample. If you've mentioned something else, we can credit other samples as well, other limitations as well, but you just need to think carefully. But have you, as a minimum, got one really detailed P paragraph and one slightly limited one? That would get you 2. If you cannot contextualise, if you have not contextualised this answer, then you do not get any marks. Okay? And that's a really important one to note down on your targets. There is a correlation or relationship between pupil scores on a test of mathematical ability and pupil scores on a test of a musical ability. Hopefully you've got all the marks here. 1 mark for identifying its correlation and using the word correlation or relationship. 1 mark for operationalising covariable 1, which in this case would be the scores on a maths test. And 1 mark for operationalising covariable 2, which is scores on a test of musical ability. Covariable 1 and covariable 2 are interchangeable. So if you talked about musical ability and then maths ability, I don't mind. It's the operationalising that's the most important bit. If you haven't done the first one, you can't get the second 2 marks. Otherwise, it's a case of if you've said correlation, you've operationalised 1 variable, you get 1 mark. If you've operationalised the second variable, you get the 3rd mark. If you said there will be a difference between, no marks. There we go. No marks for a null or a directional hypothesis, or one referring to an association or a difference. So if you say there will be no relationship between, then you don't get any marks. If you say there will be a positive correlation between, if you say there's a negative correlation between, no marks. Or if you talk about there will be a difference between or an association between, no marks. 1 mark for identifying a problem for 2B. 1 mark for explaining why it's a problem, and 1 mark for linking it back to validity. So, subjective judgment could be a problem. She's made it up herself. It is very, very subjective. It's based on opinion, which therefore opens itself up to bias, which therefore reduces the validity, so we cannot be confident of cause and effect, although we can't be confident of that anyway because it's correlation, so ignore that, the cause and effect bit, but all the rest of it is the case. It's a very subjective judgment, it's opinion based. Another problem would be, so you only get 1 mark for 1 problem. If you've talked about 2, then you do, technically the way I would mark it is you don't get any marks because you haven't read the question properly, which is a shame. Variation in song might affect judgment rather than ability, so the songs are different. One person might like one song more than another song, so it's nothing to do with whether they've got any ability or not. It is to do with the fact that that the song is more preferred, and therefore it lacks validity because it's not measuring ability, it is measuring personal preference of songs. Difficulty is varied, so there's difference in songs again, so that might affect ability. If one person was singing a really difficult song and one was singing a really simple song, then their abilities would be different, not because of their maths ability, but because of the difficulty in the song making it harder for them, so that reduces the validity. And operationalizing tuneful singing may not be valid. There are many other ways that musical ability is can be assessed. So I know people who can't sing at all and play the most fantastic musical instruments, or vice versa. So I also know somebody who can sing really beautifully but then struggles to play through blind mice on the piano. Okay, so that's that one. 2C, test, retest. You get 1 mark for identifying test, retest. I'll be generous because technically on the mark scheme it's a little less flexible than that, but I think you deserve one for test, retest. Test, 1 mark for 1 mark for an explanation of how it's used, and 1 mark for an explanation of why it allows us to check for reliability, or if there's a potential desired outcome, but really it's all about checking for reliability. No marks if it's not contextualized. Can you go through? Can you highlight the words from the stimulus? So anywhere that you've used words from the stimulus, highlight it. You can get access marks. If you can't, again, you need to go back to the front of your booklet and you need to think about that one carefully. Okay. So tell me what identify test, retest, tell me how you use it, and tell me how it checks for reliability. So you get somebody to complete it, you get someone to complete it a week later, you compare the results, and if the results are similar, then you get then it can be considered reliable. If the results are different, then you cannot consider it reliable. 2D, so this is a nice easy one. The teacher chose to use a random sample because it would probably be more representative of the whole GCSE group than if she had used an opportunity or a volunteer sample. So you get 1 mark there for saying that the random sampling allows for representativeness. It's good if you can compare it with other methods, but it's not essential. And then you'd explain why this is a strength. So that's essentially a strength of random sampling is, this is a strength because it increases the population validity of the research. What I will say there, no contextualization, no marks. So again, can you go through, can you highlight, bearing in mind I'll be looking at everybody's and checking whether they've highlighted or underlined, and there is some highlighters in the drawer. Any words from the stimulus that you could use, please. If you haven't, no contextualization, no marks. Hopefully you're not falling for that anymore. Credit can only be awarded for scatter graphs. Any other graph, no marks. So if you've very carefully and painstakingly and lovingly drawn a beautiful bar chart, no marks. It's got to be a scatter graph only. You get 1 mark for appropriately plotted scores, so just have a look and see if the this picture, see if the scores look right. 1 mark for an appropriate title, and 1 mark for correctly labelled axes. If one of your axes is incorrectly labelled, you get no marks for that. You don't get that 1 mark. If you don't have a title, you don't get that 1 mark, and if you haven't plotted them correctly, you don't get that 1 mark either. Yours should look like either one of these. It doesn't matter whether musical ability is on the side or maths ability is on the side. We're quite flexible with that. So if you can pause the video and have a look and check for these things. So I'm just going to explain them, then pause. So make sure you have a title which roughly correlates with that title at the top. Make sure your dots here, so is the title the same? Do your dots, do your data points, do they look similar to that? And have you labelled both axes? If so, 3 marks, you can feel very smug. So pause there, quickly compare them, and then give yourselves a mark. The whole time you mark this, if you do not get the full marks, apologies, zoned out there. If you do not get the full marks, then please write down and make a little note as to why. How would you get full marks if I gave you this assessment again? I may be mean enough to do that one day. Question 2, F. You get 1 mark for stating the type of correlation, telling me a bit about the correlation. You get 1 mark for telling me what that means, and 1 mark for discussing the problems with this conclusion. So the correlation is negative. This means that high scorers in maths ability tend to achieve low scores on musical ability, and vice versa. So 1 mark for saying it's negative, 1 mark for explaining what does negative mean as one goes up, the other goes down. The other things that you could discuss are that there were outliers that could make us question the correlation. The sample size is a problem, so although we've drawn that conclusion, we have to consider it carefully because of the sample size, and the correlation coefficient. So you could guess that, which was minus 0.2. Or that was roughly what it looked like using the according to the mark scheme. I think that's incredibly dangerous. I will allow you to have it, but I would not recommend that you do it. By eye, it's very, very difficult. You can talk about whether it's strong or weak, negative or positive, but you can't really do the correlation coefficient without being careful, without potentially messing up there. So tell me what the correlation is, name it, explain what that means, and then tell me why there's problems with it. Lots of outliers, small sample. And finally, question 3, 1 mark for procedure, 1 mark for mentioning results. So here you get 2 marks for telling me what replication means, and then you get 2 marks for explaining why it's important. So 1 mark for saying that replication is where you can repeat the procedure exactly as exactly as originally done, as we always say, and then you get 1 mark for saying and then checking to see if the results are similar. If they are, we can be confident of reliability. So procedure, can it be replicability? Can it be repeated in exactly the same way or very, very similar? And then we check the results to see if they are similar or different. Similar, confident of reliability. Different, not confident of reliability. And then I will accept any of the following reasons. However, it's only 2 marks, so my advice would be to really go to town with one particular answer for this. Increases confidence in the results. So if we see something happen more than once, so if we see it happen 2 times or 5 times or 10 times, statistically we can be more confident of the results and more confident of them. I'm debating whether cause and effect would apply there, because it could be, I suppose, if you consistently see the same thing over and over again, it's cause and effect, although that might muddy slightly with validity, so don't worry as much. But if you consistently see the results going over and over, being the same over and over again, you can be you can be more confident of them. It allows us to strengthen theories because of attempted falsification. So if you're consistently conducting research to go, well, this time it didn't disprove my hypothesis, so it looks like it supports it, but maybe I need to try again because it might have been a fluke. So if you repeatedly do that, you can be more confident the theory is strengthened because you've gone through the process of falsifications, attempting to disprove it. Reliability or consistency of findings supported, so you can be confident of reliability, so that would be a mark. So replicability is totally separate from reliability, isn't it? Replicability is repeating it and looking at the results. So one of the things you can be confident of is reliability. So if you did talk about the idea that if you can replicate it and find the same results, then it's reliable, you could get a mark there. It's a condition of validity, which is sort of a bit of a woolly one. It is on the mark scheme, so if you mentioned it, you will get a mark for that one. It's the idea that it needs to be replicable to be valid. You need to be able to repeat it and find the same results to be valid, but I wouldn't go with that one personally. I think reliability and validity are such difficult concepts. To combine them makes things life a lot more tricky and makes it easier for you to potentially lose marks if the examiner's not feeling very generous. And then generalizability is increased if you do something over and over again, particularly if you use a different sample every time. Then you will be able to generalize it more and more. Think about Milgram's test, maybe the Stroop test, that can be generalized across the whole of humankind, probably, almost, near enough, why not? And that is the end of that. So go back over your answers and look for any kind of consistently some things that you aren't doing, so you're not contextualizing, you're not referring back to validity, etc., etc. And then I would like you to fill in the sheet, the front sheet at the front, so ticks and crosses what you've done, and at the bottom tell me, did you meet your target? Yes, set yourself a new one. No, what are you going to do to kind of improve that for next time? Think about those. You've seen those assessment sheet loads, so you should be really confident on how to fill them in. Well done for surviving your first A2 assessment.